And so tonight we're going to be going through the struggle with lust, which is part 3 of our series. Before we jump into the topic, I want you to tell me, I know this is an image that a lot of you guys have seen before. What do you see? What do you see? George, what do you see?
A woman turning her face into
Where do you see an old woman, young woman? What do you see? You see a woman looking that way?
Yeah.
All right. Anyone see something different? You see a grandmother. Good. So you see, some of you guys see a younger woman looking away, and some of y'all see this is a grandmother's chin, her mouth, her nose, her eye. Okay? This is a shawl. She's facing this way. All right, that's her nose. She has a big Egyptian nose. Her chin. She's looking away.
Oh, I see it.
All right, very good. So,
Where's her eye?
Her eyes are right above her nose.
all right.
Where's the other eye?
On the other side. On the other side. It's the other eye.
I see that eye. Where's the other eye?
The other eye.
All right, so let's move on. The struggle with lust. The struggle with lust, guys. A lot of us are under the illusion that this is something that's just for young people or just for a certain age. And what I want to say is, before we get started with tonight's talk, is this is a struggle that at different times of your life, whether you're younger, you're senior in high school, you're in college, you're graduated, you're working, you're married, the struggle with lust is a struggle that continues to challenge us at different times of our life in different ways. This is an issue that is not just for guys. This is an issue that both men and women struggle with, although it expresses itself very differently, whether you're a boy or a girl. The expression is very different. It's a subject that we oftentimes are very ashamed to talk about. It's a topic that a lot of times we go around quite a bit and we avoid talking about really in depth. And it's a struggle that in one of the most unusual places and times will affect us. A lot of times I've had people come in confession, they'll tell me, while I'm coming to take communion, I'll have lustful thoughts. Standing to try to pray, and I'll have lustful thoughts. It knows no boundaries, guys. This struggle, whether you're old, young, guy, girl, whatever, however you're expressing it currently, no matter where you're at, while you're sitting right here, while you're in Good Friday, the holiest day of the year, it's a place that we can really struggle with it. Matthew chapter 5 verse 28 tells us, whoever looks on a woman to lust after her, or I want to say whoever looks to a person to lust after them has committed adultery within their heart, with that person already in their heart. Christ is so radical in his teaching about lust. And so we think this idea of lust is this horrible thing, this desire. But in Matthew 13 and Hebrews 6, the same word, lust, is used. Matthew 13 says, many prophets and righteous people have desired, or the Greek word that's used and translated in different ways, it's the same word that was used in Matthew 5, desire after. Okay? So what I want to say is that lust is not so much about the desire, but after that which we desire. Because the prophets and righteous people had a desire to see and to hear the things of Christ, and to see Christ himself. Hebrews 6 says, we desire each of you to show this same diligence to the very end in order to make your hope sure. Okay? So they're talking about a very different kind of strong desire here than what Christ is talking about. Why? Because the object is different, guys. Part of our struggle, I think, also, is thinking that the struggle is just one of the body. But Sam and I were actually talking earlier this week, and we were discussing how this struggle is not the struggle of the body, but it's more the struggle of that little thing we call the eye. For those of you who went to the Super Bowl party at Dave & Buster's, the halftime show was probably one of the biggest tests. There was an article saying that Beyonce was a half an inch away from a wardrobe malfunction. The Super Bowl, the commercials that we watch, those of you who go through Times Square, you ride a subway. I'm not even talking about pornography yet. I'm just talking about the things that we see in front of us, the advertising that we see in our everyday life. The movies that we're exposed to. Or rather that we expose ourselves to. Challenges us because of what our eye sees. The struggle, guys, that we're going to talk about tonight is what it is we expose our eyes to. The problem that we're going to talk about tonight is one that on the flip side, we want to look at about something that's holy and sacred and beautiful and rich, which is sex. Sex is something that God created to be holy. And we definitely have a high schooler in the building who's giggling. And this is how we were raised. When we hear the word sex and you're in high school, but Hebrews 13 gives a very different image of sex. Marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. And that word sexually immoral comes from the Greek pornos, which is where we get the word porno or pornography. And it's usually translated 46 times in the New King James Version as sexual immorality. And specifically, porneia is a sexual expression or gratification outside of marriage, which is translated scripturally sexual immorality. So if you want to know what is sexual immorality, where does the scripture speak about, what's okay before marriage? The big question, so what am I allowed to do before marriage? Is it okay to do this or that? I'm not going to get into that level of discussion. What I'm going to say is that porneia or pornos is a sexual expression or gratification outside of marriage. Any sexual expression or gratification, whether it is with myself or with another person or in my mind, that's pornos, biblically. Jesus messed everything up when he came. He flipped the whole idea of sexual immorality backwards. Because in the old covenant, just as long as you didn't do the deed, you're all right. But in the new covenant, thinking about it, daydreaming about it, maybe I'm not doing it with someone else, but in my own privacy, pornos. Back in 1953, this guy, Hugh Hefner, took that which God said was sacred and he established a new, whatever you want to call it, magazine called Playboy. And in so doing, he took that which God had established as a mystery between a man and a woman. And I want you to consider the fact for a second that we who are created in the image of God, another conversation that Sam and I were having and just really kind of put things in perspective for me. And he took that, the crowning act of God's creation, humanity, and created an $8.1 billion industry out of it, which is what it has become in 2012. Just to put it in perspective for you, pornography today parallels, its industry parallels the bottled water industry. So that which brings life as opposed to that which brings spiritual death and depression and loneliness. I want you to consider what this dude did right here. Taking God's creation, and Sam and I were talking through this earlier in the week, and he put it in such a way that really put me back a bit. Never heard it like this. I want you to consider the fact, actually Sam, say it real quick because you're going to say it much better.
Not really, but I'll try to repeat what I said. When we are looking at another person, another creation, a person, a human being, and we are looking at that person in the way of lust with the wrong eye, we are actually lusting after the image and likeness of God himself.
When he said that to me, I was like, dang, that like completely threw me back. Now, I want you to take that idea for a second and consider what people do with pornography and transfer that to an icon. That which we venerate, the image of God in an icon, in that person, people have taken that and created an $8 billion industry defiling themselves after the image of God. A distorted image, nonetheless. Lust, guys, is something that can completely take control of our lives. It enslaves people. And I'm not simply talking about pornography here, but lust in general can really control people's lives. I'd like to spend the vast majority of the time speaking about how we can understand our own desires of the flesh, our passions, where they come from, what it's all about, and what we can actually do to try to deal with it. Okay? I don't want to leave you guys here like feeling like, man, we are miserable human beings. Okay, we are not miserable human beings, but we have a miserable struggle on our hands. And I want to tell you, this is a struggle that every single one of us in this room, whether you are ashamed or not ashamed to speak about it, every one of us in this room at some point, and most of us at this time, struggle with lust in some way. And maybe not every day, but I would maybe be so bold as to say that every one of us in 2013 has at some point struggled with lust. And I don't think that's a very bold guess on my part or hypothesis. So let's talk a little bit about how the Father saw this as well. Okay? What the church actually had a lot to say through the era about our struggle with lust. The early church saw passions as the distortion of natural tendencies. We usually think like someone is passionate as a good thing, right? They're like excited. Well, when we use the word passion in church circle, if you will, they're talking about passion as like an unnatural use or distortion of the natural tendencies that you and I have. And I'm going to give you some of them in a second. Passions are neutral, natural impulses, and it depends upon whether they are directed toward the proper purpose. So for instance, gluttony is taking a natural usage of eating, right, to an extreme. Okay? So this is what a passion is. Could be gluttony, it could be not eating, it could be anorexia, it could be any kind of eating disorder. Greed is an unnatural attachment with the material world. Okay? So now we're taking a natural need to use money and the things of the world, and it's now become distorted, this natural tendency, and it turns into greed. This is a passion. Third is envy, unnatural need and want for what one does not have, whether it's possessions or it's prestige or it's whatever it might be, a gift, a talent. Passion of anger is an unnatural form of anger. God himself can be angry, but obviously doesn't sin. Okay? So these are all passions. And lastly, of course, is lust, which is an unnatural use of our sexuality. Guys, every one of us is a sexual being. Every one of us. Human beings are sexual beings. The issue is not sex. It's the unnatural usage of that sex or of our sexuality. And I want to say that we live in a time with the deck stacked against us. We do. You guys are raised, and I was raised with pornography being our sex education. We've got 7 and 6 and 5-year-old kids who've got their phones and their little, whatever, their DSMs or whatever they're called, right? And they have internet access, and these kids are getting on porn sites. The deck is stacked against us, guys. When I was growing up, and I hated when my dad said that, but when I was growing up, Leave It to Beaver was what was like hot on TV, man. Leave It to Beaver and like Brady Bunch. I mean, Brady Bunch and Leave It to Beaver, mom and dad slept in different beds. Right now, what's hot is Sex in the City. I mean, it's like, it's a different world. Media is different. What we have access to is different. And what many of us have been exposed to, on top of all that, makes it even more challenging. Passions result from repeated sin. When a sin is repeated often and lurks in our soul for a long time, it is called a passion, which are natural powers of the soul corrupted by sin and by our withdrawal from God. So the issue is not that I fell and I got back up. It's that I continue to fall in the same sin over and over and over again. And what happens eventually, guys, is we get addicted to these things. And we're going to talk about like how that progresses from here. It is like a person who runs down the stairs and trying to get in here real quick, and we've all seen it happen a few times, where someone like smacks right into the window, right? But we would say a person is pretty dumb if they like kept running back and they slammed in and they did it again over and over and over again. And that, guys, is what we do a lot of times. We see this sin and we just keep smacking our head against that window over and over and over again. And what happens is it leaves a mark. Passions are our inner sounds, those deep marks in the space of our heart that require healing. Our passions indicated not so much that we are doing something wrong, but that we are not in control. Those deep marks come from somewhere. Anyone here ever had stitches? Anyone here broken an arm or hurt themselves, had to get, okay. Anyone who was born in Egypt? Okay, anyone here born in Egypt? Excellent. So everyone who raised their hand at some point has a mark, whether it's from almost everyone, the tetanus shot or stitches or something, right? Those deep marks that we're talking about, though, these are marks in our soul. And some of these things, guys, can we open the door, please? These marks come from earthquake events in our lives. Some of us, guys, and I'm going to be the first one to say, I was exposed to pornography at the age of 6. Okay? 6 years old. I didn't know what the heck was going on. One of my next door neighbors brought it over, and I had no idea, and he just showed it to me, and I was like, 6-year-old kid. I'm thinking my son in a couple years being exposed to it. That's traumatic. Tell me that doesn't leave a deep mark. Several people have been sodomized, have been touched inappropriately, experimented with friends. They didn't know what they were doing, exposed to pornography at a young age. You take those things and they leave deeper marks. And as a result, it's not that we're doing something wrong, we're just out of control. And those are the places that need healing. Because so long as those places don't receive healing, we'll continue to be out of control. And we continue to try to control ourselves, and we're unable to. And so we keep falling. And we keep coming to confession and saying, Abuna, like, I'm still struggling with the same thing. I'm still doing the same thing. I'm still watching porn. I'm still hooking up. I'm still whatever. And the issue, guys, is there are some deep marks that we've been exposed to, or that have hurt us, that have been inflicted upon us. And these are things that we don't like to talk about. We don't like to look at. And some of these marks have been really simply caused just by the media that we watch. They're there. I want you to now imagine those icons and what Hugh Hefner did to that, and how that developed into an $8 billion industry, and how that trickles over into the other media that we're exposed to, and we see and we hear and we watch, and we talk about and we joke about, and tell me that that has not left deep wounds that need healing. And so we are out of control, and as a result, we continue to hurt ourselves. And those are the things that need to be fixed. And so they turn into habitual sins. The passions, or they may be habits of seeing, of hearing, of feeling, of thinking, of acting. There are habits which have been hardened over time, becoming like a second nature to us. Thence there is a grueling battle to break them, to redirect them. There are some of us who cannot stop. It's like second nature. It's like you tell someone, stop breathing, and you're like, dude, you're a moron. Like, what do you mean, stop breathing? Second nature. It's part of who you are. And so some of us have been doing this for so long that we just can't stop. Or we feel like we can't stop. Or even if we want to stop, we just find ourselves doing it. Girl walks by, cute girl walks by, cute guy walks by, and we look and we're like doing double and triple and quadruple takes. And then we start thinking about it. And we're like, man, I got to stop. And then we look back again. It becomes a second nature to us. And the more we feed it, the more it becomes bigger and stronger. Passions then enslave the will. And this is the worst part. The worst part is when, and I'm going to take you into pornography, a person cannot go about their day, their routine, follows a certain set of steps throughout their day, and when they get to that part of their day, they have to watch pornography. They're addicted, guys. The passions represent the lowest level of which human nature can fall. I remember one time back when I was in college, I was walking down the street, and this dude was coming out of a bar, and other guy was walking around, and he smoked and threw out, and this dude that was walking out of the bar, he was drunk out of his mind, and he like saw the cigarette butt down there, and he like got down on his hands and knees, and he's picking up, and he's like, the dude, it was like the lowest level of humanity I've ever imagined in my life. And this is what our passions do to us. We find ourselves doing things that we're like, what the heck am I doing? Why am I thinking like this? I'm in church. Why is this coming to my mind? This is like the lowest level that we can reach, or that we can fall. In fact, they overcome the will so that the man of the passions is no longer a person of will. We say that he is a person ruled, enslaved, carried along by the passions. And there's not a single one of us that would say we would ever be a slave. Slavery is the most ugly thing in the world. And this is what happens to us. The more we feed ourselves, we're in a relationship that we know we need to get out of. It is toxic. It is poisonous. And yet we cannot, because of our own self-image and our own image of sexuality, and we're enslaved. And every time we try to get out, we just can't. When a person becomes addicted, lust can operate as like a tornado. Okay? If you notice here the tornado, what you see is that everything is flying around it. Right? Everything is rotating around it. What ends up happening here, guys, is when we are really fall deeper and deeper and deeper, and we're going to come out of this in just a minute. Don't worry, okay? I know we're going real low, but we've got to go real low before we can come out. And when we come out and you see the light, I think you're going to be just fine, because I see some really long faces right now, okay? But what happens to every one of us when lust becomes the center of our lives, everything else revolves around, and it's like we're out of control, man. We're out of control. There's nothing we can do. And everything gets pulled back and forth by lust. And I can't think. I'm studying. I've got to take the MCAT, and I just can't because I'm thinking about whoever. And I'm struggling with my lust. And I can't make it through the day without watching porn. I can't. We're out of control at this point. And this is the worst place in the world to be. I want to talk to you guys psychologically how we reach this, and then on the flip side, how do we get out, okay? There's always the first experience, that quick fix. For a lot of us, the first experience, it was caused, as I had mentioned, when I was a little kid. I didn't know any better. It was thrown at me. I had no idea what I was seeing, and it was just there. It was my first experience. I was a kid. I was innocent. Didn't know anything about anything at that point. And for others, they can get addicted to lust and get sucked into lust. It was a quick fix. They were down, they were depressed, and they figured if I go and I fall into lust or pornography or adultery or I hook up or whatever, it just makes me feel better about myself. I'm having a miserable day. I feel really like garbage about myself. And there are so many people that I know that, good friends of mine, that they literally, in order to get out of feeling miserable about themselves, they will try to fix the problem by hooking up with someone, or by watching porn, or by self-pleasuring. The second step is that person experiences the high, okay? The high is when this little part of your brain, so you have the frontal cortex or prefrontal cortex, right? This is where all your smart stuff goes on, right? It's where all your reasoning, your thinking, all that stuff, your higher level of thinking comes in. Right below that, there's this little tiny itty bitty part called the nucleus accumbens. And so this little piece releases something called dopamine. And this is that high that you feel. And what happens for every time after that, because it felt so good, you're simply pursuing that high again. And guys, girls, when you're exposed to porn and you feel like exhilarated, or a person gets involved in sexual relationships and their body is exhilarated, it's stimulated all over, goosebumps, that's what's going on. It's just dopamine. That's it. It's a little chemical released, feels good. You're like, man, this is great. And from then on, if you don't turn it around immediately, you start chasing after that euphoria over and over again. This is what happens with addicts, whether it's drugs or it's sex and lust or it's food. I mean, it's literally I'm just chasing after that dopamine, that high over and over and over again. And lastly, we become addicted. And this is when you're at the bottom. And there's some of us who are addicted to internet, to porn, whatever. It is an addiction. We can't stop. We really can't stop. Okay? There are people that I know that have been so addicted to sex and to porn and that they've actually had to go to counseling, to therapy for this. Yeah. And they have. something called Sexaholics Anonymous to help people get over their addictions to porn and to sex. They want to stop, they find themselves unable to. The passions have enslaved them. Back in 2011, last year, 2 years ago, October of 2011, there was this article, and its title you guys can see right there. It says, "Internet Pornography Destroying Men's Ability to Perform with Real Women Finds a Study." Okay? So what's happening, guys, and I would say it's not just porn, it's exposure, like people who have multiple partners before marriage or outside of marriage. What happens is they get used to this certain experience, and it's destroying their ability to have a healthy sexual relationship within marriage. And this is part of the text of the article. It says, according to a report in Psychology Today, porn-induced sexual dysfunction is a growing problem. Okay? So some people are being exposed to pornography or sexual relationships and intimacy outside of marriage, porn, what if sexual immorality, any self-gratification, right? Outside of marriage, caused by continuous overstimulation of dopamine, that the neurotransmitter that activates the body's reaction to sexual pleasure by repeatedly viewing pornography on the internet. Okay? So what happens, guys, is whether it is porn or it's the porno sexual immorality in general, this goes for masturbation, this goes for any sexual gratification outside of marriage, pornography, any of this. What happens is when we expose ourselves to that, dopamine is triggered. And the more we expose ourselves to that, the more it's triggered. And so we're constantly trying to get that level of high again. A paradoxical effect is created whereby with each new thrill or dopamine spike, the brain loses its ability to respond to dopamine signals, meaning that porn users demand increasingly extreme experiences to become sexually aroused. Man, I'm telling you that this is so important that you deal with your lust struggle in order to have a healthy sex life in marriage. No joke. This is Psychology Today. This ain't my words. This ain't the Bible talking. Psychology Today is saying you need to get your struggle with lust under control. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself unable to enjoy sex in marriage when you're allowed to have it. You're like, dude, I'm waiting until I get married. I'm not having sex with anyone. I'm just watching porn. I'm just sitting in my room by myself doing whatever I'm doing. And you're going to find yourself in marriage. And I know of people, not from church, and I'm sure in church it's the same thing. I know of people who, as a result of their struggle with lust, have ended up getting divorced because they were so addicted to porn that they just couldn't satisfy or be satisfied by their spouse. They just couldn't. And this isn't just a guy thing. This is a guy and a girl thing. It's more prevalent with men, but it's alarmingly growing very quickly with women. And I want to tell you, some of you are like, dude, I don't have this issue. Well, the greatest way to avoid it and prevention is to never get started. That first experience, that's the fatal one. If you've never been exposed, praise God, keep away. Just say no. Marriage, I want to talk now a little bit about the beauty of marriage and sex and what it is that God has in store for us and how we can get to that point. Marriage replicates the creative energy of God whereby the couple as one flesh unites to create new life. For Christians, theology of sex based on divine love is at the highest principle. You know, the fathers spoke about sex and marriage with so much respect and honor. They equated marriage to the theology of the Trinity. They said a husband and wife are like an icon of the Trinity. And when it's at the pinnacle is when mom and pop are in the bedroom procreating. That's when the theology of the Trinity is most revealed. Guys, this is a beautiful thing. I'm going to say this again. Sex in marriage is beautiful, and it is holy, it is sacred, and it is good, and that's the way God intended it to be. It's not just a physical act. It is also a spiritual act. And I would say that it is a physical expression of something that is deeply spiritual. So whenever we think like it's not a big deal, or what's the big deal, I want to tell you this is a deeply spiritual thing. And this is a great and holy experience. I remember one time telling a guy, when you get married, I told him, I'm like, just when you and your wife get married, and I've shared this story with you guys a number of times before. I told a guy, he had just come here from the Saeed like a few years before, and for some reason, like he ended up on my door of all people. And he was like, yeah, Salin now, or pray for us, we're about to go get married, and any advice that you have for us. They very lovingly and respectfully, they're coming, to receive a word of wisdom. And they came to the wrong guy. So I told him, I'm like, yeah, I have some, and I tried to communicate all this in Arabic. Hopefully I was effective and I didn't insult the guy or something. But I told him, like, when you and your wife are, about to be intimate, he's like, and I was like, and I said it, alaka zawgaya, like that marital relationship. And he was like, and his eyes are like bugging out now. And his wife is standing right there, like, or his fiance at the time. And I was like, before that, just say a prayer together. And he was like, what? Flipped out. It's like, and took off out the door. Like it's like some sacrilegious thing. Sex, guys, is a really beautiful thing that God intended for husbands and wives to share in their marriage bed. And any kind of sexual gratification outside of marriage. And you ask me how far, and I'm telling you the biblical definition of sexual immorality or pornos is any kind of sexual gratification outside of marriage. Whether it's with another person or with myself, that itself distorts the image of love and of creativity. We want to talk in these last 10 minutes about how we can experience transformation and how we can begin our process of defeating our struggle with lusts. And guys, I just want to say this is a process. What I'm talking to you guys about today is not like, okay, we're going to walk out of here, do these 6 steps, and you're good. This ain't a 12-step or 6-step program. This is the beginning of a process for every one of us. Number 1 is we have to have a will to fight. We've got to have a will to fight. You're telling me I'm struggling with lust, and I'm telling you lust, if you're willing to fight and have some courage and some discipline, you'll never overcome it. Never. Amma Beeman says, when David was fighting with the lion, he seized it by the throat and killed it immediately. If we take ourselves by the throat and by the belly, the desires, with the help of God, we shall overcome the invisible lion. We have to have a willingness to fight. Someone turned me on to this really crazy workout program called Insanity. And it's really insane. And I'm telling you that first 2 weeks, I quit about 40 times. And I kept going. And it was only because I had a will to fight. It's not that I'm a good athlete or anything like that. I just had a willingness to fight that allowed me to keep going. And I know other people who have started it and they've quit within 2 days. And they never started it back up again. And that tells me those people just have no courage and no discipline and no willingness to fight. That transfers to our spiritual lives. If I'm disciplined and I'm perseverant and I have a will to fight, that's going to transfer. That's a character trait. We have to be willing to fight. You're going to walk out of this door and you're going to struggle with lust. We're going to stand up to pray and you're going to struggle with lust. You're going to get home tonight and you're going to struggle with lust. But you have to have a willingness to fight. Step one. Sexual intimacy reserved for marriage. It is a gift of God to be fully enjoyed and experienced only within marriage. Number two is we've got to, after we have a willingness to fight, we've got to starve our passions. And this is not like some rocket science, but if we starve our passions by fighting against them and by feeding our spirit, and guys, these are not like, I'm not going to give you something new right here. These are like the age-old tested 2,000 years of Christianity. Do these things and you're going to starve your passions. You're going to starve your desires. It's prayer, fasting, and repentance, guys. You have to be willing to fight, but you cannot do it on your own. The only way to starve the passions is by drawing on the things of God. If you are struggling with lust and porn, or in a relationship and can't get out, dude, take a 3-day season of fasting. Fast about it. Do like a real fast. I'm not saying like change and have some like old ass and some falafel or whatever. No. Have a real 3 days of fasting where you like discipline yourself and you starve those passions with intense prayer and turning yourself back to God. That's the only way, guys.
That's the Daniel fast.
Daniel fast, there's the Jonah fast, there's all sorts of different fasts. There's juice fast, we can talk all about that. One of the ways we starve our passions is by using right words, guys. When we use wrong words, like crude words, that only intensifies our wrong view of sexuality. So one of the ways that we starve the passion is by stopping to use like the dirty jokes that we oftentimes, unfortunately, that float among some of us. If we're going to keep joking about these things and use like wrong words, we're just fueling it. We're fueling that desire, that passion inside of us. And we've also got to be willing to avoid media that exposes us to sex that is devoid of God's creative love and commitment. Guys, this is one of the hardest things in the world. You can say I can do everything else, but don't ask me to give up my media. I'm telling you, one of the only things that helped me back in 2000, and it's a continuous struggle. It's a continuous struggle for myself. But one of the things that helped me back in 2000 was I shattered my set of CDs and my movies and my all my music, like my secular music that was all full of that kind of junk. I got rid of it. I had to. I had to starve the thoughts. I came home one day and I literally destroyed $900 worth of media. I just threw it away. One of my friends got so mad at me. He's like, dude, you should have given it to me. It's like I should have sold it, but there was no No, I'm joking. But we've got to be willing to avoid media, guys. And this is a major step. Some of you guys have hundreds and thousands of movies. And I'm not talking about porn, I'm just talking about regular movies, but that are full. They might as well be porn. And music. And it's just, we hear it, and it's the subliminal messages are there. And if we don't avoid this stuff, we're just going to continue to fuel it. You're like, dude, don't ask me to give up my tunes. Well, it's up to you. It's your call. It's your call, but don't come back and say, listen, I'm still struggling. Well, you got to take some action. You got to be willing to sacrifice. Number 3, live in the present moment. Live in the present moment. A lot of times what happens with many of us, guys, is that we are, part of the struggle of lust is we're thinking about, I want to get married one day. And I want to enjoy sexual intimacy in the future. And I want to have a family. And so what happens is we catapult ourselves 10 years into the future, but we're not married. And so what happens, a lot of us, we end up living as if like we live family, but we ain't married. We ain't married. And so we need to learn to live in the present moment and enjoy God's grace now. And stop thinking about what is going to happen and could happen and will happen in 10 years from now. And for those of us who are type A personalities, this is really difficult because we always want to be in control. And if my struggle is porn, well, that's even more difficult because with porn, you are in control. You click what you want, you watch what you want, you do what you want. And so part of the challenge is also seeking the presence of God today and not thinking so far into the future. And I know a lot of y'all, you're ready to get married yesterday. Well, I'm saying seek God today. And when that comes, run for the no. My wife is watching. What? Happy Valentine's Day. Number 4 is synergy. With all that we talk about that we are going to fight and we're going to starve and we're going to do this, there is no way that we're not going to overcome our lusts without help from God and help from each other. Guys, this is not a you can just be strong enough to do this. This is a you can be strong, but you need the grace of God working in synergy with you. And in addition to that, you need each other. We need each other. We do. If you try to do this on your own, just you and God, might as well move to the desert. If you really want to overcome this with God, allow yourself to be exposed to someone who can keep you accountable. This part, now you're ramping it up. You're amping it up. Now you're really strong with lust. Now you say to your boy or your girl, I really need help with this. I'm really struggling. Anytime there's softwares. If your struggle is porn, there are softwares called, there's one called Covenant Eyes, that I actually have downloaded on my own computer. And I have a Covenant Eyes buddy who lives on the opposite side of the country. And any website that I go to, he sees. If we're serious about overcoming our struggle, we've got to be willing to expose ourselves with other people. You do? You ain't doing it on your own. But it's a shameful thing to talk about. Well, if you want to overcome it, look for help. Number 5, be willing to transform our thinking. What we do to our bodies has a direct correlation about what we think about God and what we think God thinks about sex. I take you back to the story, and we're just this one and one more. The story of that young man who was about to get married, and when I told him, pray before you go and you consummate your marriage, he flipped out. I'm telling you, we need to transform the way we think about sexuality and the way we think that God thinks about sexuality. Because I'm telling you, it is a beautiful, holy thing. And we need to see that God, and understand that God sees it that way as well. And last point is be at the right place at the right time with the right person. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. King David says when in the springtime, when kings were supposed to be off at battle, King David was at home and he was up on the rooftop. And he looked off and he saw this cute little honey called Bathsheba. And you all know the story from there. He was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And we need to be at the right place at the right time with the right persons. That means I don't go to the park and sit in the park with someone of the opposite sex at 10 o'clock at night. That means that if my struggle is with porn, that I make sure I don't go sit in my bedroom with my laptop at 11 o'clock at night. I go sit in the living room. I need to be willing to be at the right place at the right time with the right persons. And if I'm not, then I need to get myself there. Healthy boundaries are critical. That means that if you are constantly texting with someone of the opposite sex at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, that you stop doing that. Because that's when 106.7, the love music comes on and you are feeling romantic and the messages are flying back and forth and then the thoughts start up. We need to be willing to put up healthy boundaries to protect ourselves and help ourselves in this struggle. I wanna close with just a word of hope for you. Because I know personally a number of you that I'm father of confession for, and I know that many of you have struggled and have really made major strides in this area. Major strides. By simply doing some of the things that were mentioned up there. And if you found something else that works out better, share it with each other. But I want you to understand that other people who are sitting next to you and who are standing speaking have had struggles with this and have made strides. And most days moving forward, some days backwards. But the goal has to be forward. And this can be for you. It's just we've got to be willing to fight, to starve the passions. We've got to be willing to work on it and to take steps in that direction. I'll close with that, and we'll take a few minutes of questions since we ended up wrapping up or starting a little late. Do we have any questions? Yes.
So you're in a marriage, and you know, I don't know how inappropriate this is gonna be, and you guys just want to try everything everywhere, right? Isn't that lustful? But you guys are married, but you guys are publicly, I don't know, you guys are on apart.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So people can actually experience lust in marriage. Biblical love is a self-sacrificing love. So biblical love does, I'm not looking, and guys, this is tough because when you think about sex, you're thinking about itself, it's gratifying. It's a great experience, a wonderful experience. The married people in the room, hopefully only, can vouch for that, okay? So the point though is that when we are experiencing sex in a non-sacrificial way, what that ends up doing is it becomes very self-centered, okay? So in marriage, I know a lot of marriages where sex becomes a matter of control, becomes a matter of fighting. So some people actually withdraw sex within marriage in order to control or to hold power and authority over the other person. So I don't want the impression to be like in marriage, anything goes. I mean, there needs to be obviously respect for each other within marriage. I'm not going to get into people's bedrooms though and tell them what they can and can't do. There are certain times in history where certain writings that I found said that, and I thought personally that was very much outside of the scope of the church. And what most of the fathers avoided going into the bedroom and saying, this is appropriate, this isn't. I read a book actually one time. It was published by someone in California. And it actually said that it actually tried to say that there is one position that is suitable and this is what the position is. And the book was brought to me in a box of like 100. And I was forced to take it. And as soon as the person left, I took the box and I threw it in the trash. Because I didn't feel that that's an appropriate thing for us to say, in your bedroom, this is what you and you are allowed to do. But there are certain principles that should guide that, which is love, mutual respect, sacrifice, absolutely. So, good question. Thank you. Bashor.
I have a question about your first step. Can you go back to that?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was having the courage or the will.
Will to fight, yeah.
What about when you don't have the will to fight? When you're saying like people who are enslaved. Slave doesn't have
Absolutely.
the will to fight, and these people their spirits are broken. Like
Yeah.
somebody who smokes will tell you every cigarette is the last cigarette. You know, you
Right.
always swear it off. But what about when you just don't have the will? You don't have it in you. You're asleep.
If I've reached the point where I'm really, truly addicted, then I would send that person to counseling. So like a 12-step program. And guys, I've had to do that before, and it's been very successful. Because we have to be willing to admit not every struggle is simply a spiritual struggle. And some of our struggles are psychological, they're emotional. Some of us, like I mentioned, have been deeply wounded from our childhood. Some of us have been abused sexually, psychologically, physically, emotionally. Some of us have been exposed to porn at young ages, right? So we have some of us have some deep, deep wounds. And so we need to understand that perhaps part of the reason that I'm so addicted today is because of what I went through earlier in my life. Okay. Any other questions?
Can I answer that?
Yes, Sam.
This type of struggle needs to be exposed.
Yeah.
If you deal with it yourself, you can never overcome it. Like when I said earlier, just like alcoholism and other addiction 12-step programs, first thing you got to do is realize and admit that I cannot do this alone. I need a higher power. That higher power is God. So a lot of alcoholics and drug addicts come to God through this 12-step program by being completely broken, realizing your weakness, and you cannot overcome it alone. You need the power of God. Next step. Unless it's exposed in light and you are doing, like Abuna said, the equivalent of a software that says covenant eyes where someone's watching you, well, what you need to do is find people you trust.
Yep.
Let them be your support group. The same way we treat depression in people, depression needs medication, therapy, but most of all, it needs support of people, family, friends, people who love and care for you more than anyone. If you have that support system around you, and they hold you accountable to your actions, and you are not hiding it, it's not in the dark, the light came and shed light on you, and you are willing to expose yourself, you will overcome this addiction successfully. There's no doubt about it. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But that's the first step you have to do, is expose yourself, find people you're accountable to, rely on God, and let them all work together in your life.
Yeah. Excellent.
Mona, can you
And
tell us more about the Covenant Eye? That's the website that people share.
Yeah, so it's a software. I was first exposed to it by a professor named Dr. Albert Rossi, and he himself has been using Covenant Eyes for years. He teaches pastoral ministry at St. Vladimir's. He's the gentleman that I sent you all the email about, and he'll be speaking more on this subject, I think, in a couple of weeks, whenever that day was. But Covenant Eyes, basically, it's a software that you download onto your computer. It recognizes your IP address, and any website. So my Covenant Eyes buddy is Emmanuel. So any site that he visits, I see, and vice versa.
He gets on the website. Yeah, he registered for this website.
We both did, and we pay $8 a month for that. It's a
Church is willing to pay that, guys, for anyone who's willing to download this
Yeah.
software.
But I think what Samah said is it needs to be someone that you trust, and you have to be willing, you've got to want this as well. Because part of the thing, like, you can find a loophole for anything. But if this is something that you really want, then you need to be willing to pursue it. I know that there's a couple more. Chris, and then Bulla, and we'll wrap up.
So
And Shunuda.
I was wondering how important or how important is that spiritual brother or spiritual sister, that spiritual friend in that way for someone?
A spiritual someone is important. Whether it's a spiritual father, it's a spiritual uncle or brother or sister, someone who that I know that I can trust fully, that I can expose myself, and I have a relationship with, that's a regular relationship. I believe I myself wouldn't have overcome certain spiritual sins without, or certain struggles rather, without the help of someone else. Impossible for certain things. Okay, some of you might be much stronger and able to do so on your own. So I don't want to say that it has to be one way or another. It's never a formula, guys.
So is it just accountability?
You need an accountability to someone. And if that means that you go to a counselor, so be it. But this is a serious thing that, all I want to say, guys, is this is a serious thing that if you really want to overcome and at least begin, I'm not saying that it's going to be completely eradicated, but this is a process that we journey with our whole lives. But we can make progress in this area, but we need help. Bola and Shunuda?
I feel like sometimes we lose the will to fight is because then we come at that point where we're like, okay, that's it. I have lost hope and I don't care about myself anymore. Whatever happens, happens. If I get married and do whatever with my wife, I'm not going to be satisfied. That's it. We lose hope in ourselves. We become
Very depressed.
Right.
But I feel like pornography or lust in general, it's a huge problem, and it's a huge sin against God. It brings disgrace to God. I feel like sometimes God really is hurt by seeing His children look at His image distorted in a distorted manner.
I would maybe tweak it a little bit and say that we should be, I don't know if God gets hurt, but we should be hurt that we distort the image of God. We should. God himself doesn't get hurt in the sense that we think about, but we do. We should. I should be offended that I am distorting God's image. That I'm somehow taking this beautiful, creative crown of his creation and like distorting it. Like that should hurt me. At least as a first step. And then perhaps after that is to just pursue and understand, like, even if I've been there, and I let me save that till the end. Okay? Let me come back to that at the end.
I just want to share something that I've heard recently. A term called sublimation. I'm not talking about it, sublimation. I'm not talking about it from the medical point of view. The psychological point of view means that whenever you get sexual desires, you just transform all those desires into doing something else. So whatever that is, running could be playing a sport, anything. That whenever you get those sexual desires, immediately you transform it to doing something else.
A different energy, absolutely. Very good. We do need to wrap up. I know there's more questions, but the one thing that I did want to wrap up with, I know some of us have fallen really deeply, guys, whether it's sexual sin, sexual immorality, pornography, masturbation, and as a result of those things, struggling with depression, eating disorders, insomnia. A lot of us have fallen deep, some of us not as deep. And I just want to say, regardless of where you have been, I love the passage in Joel chapter 2, I believe it is, where he says, God can restore the years the locusts have destroyed. So regardless of where you've been, please never lose hope. You might say that I am really, as you're saying, Bola, like you mentioned, sometimes we get so deep and so depressed, we feel like there's never hope. And I want to be sure, no matter how far you've deeply fallen and how deep the wounds and the marks are there, that there's always hope to overcome. And God really does transform people's lives. Okay? Thank you very much.